directed by Jason Heir, and is the documentary miniseries that the entire world is talking about. It has taken the crown from the Tiger King and put it onto the King of Kings. I'm talking about Michael Jordan. The Last Dance actually covers a lot of things. It's got a pretty complex structure, which is part of why it's so interesting. So generally, for a kind of documentary like this, you'd have the interviews, the present day interviews, and then you go through the archival footage and the timeline, and that's basically your basic storytelling structure. And this layers in a third timeline, which adds more complexity, but also I feel a lot of artistry, and is really where almost sort of the soul of the film is, or of the miniseries, and certainly is where it gets its name from, The Last Dance. So during the 1997-1998 season, the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan, I think expressly Jordan, authorized a bunch of people with cameras to follow them around for what ended up and what everybody felt like was going to be their final season together. The Bulls and their coach Phil Jackson, they were all going to leave and go on their separate ways. Were they going to win another three-peat, another third championship in a row? For some, leave with 6 NBA rings around their fingers. That archival footage of just following the team around, sort of D.A. Pennebaker, Maisel-style cinema verite, is fascinating. And I think that there is a truly great film in there if you just edited a cut-together, non-narrated, sort of just fly-on-the-wall documentary. Of course, if you do that, you do lose a lot of the context for most people, a lot of the mainstream appeal, and probably the possibility to make it into a 10-part series and have people talk about it for 5 weeks. This is where I will expose, I suppose, my own hypocrisies, is that despite the fact that I think it would have been a better documentary or a better film had they done this, it also would have made it sort of less engaging, because I don't know that much about the NBA or about basketball. I know Jordan, obviously, because everybody knows Jordan. And if you grew up in the 90s like I did, Jordan was the most probably famous person in the world at that point. So I think what a lot of people are taking away from it is how sort of driven Jordan is and how kind of aggro he is. He did cultivate in the 90s this sort of perfect image, which was kind of shattered here and there by the media, because that's what the media like to do. He's berating his teammates, he's calling them bitches and hoes, and he is, a huge trash talker. He is obsessed with winning to a point that's kind of sociopathic. And I think a lot of people are surprised by that. I'm not that surprised. I imagine they're all like that. I imagine that to get to that level, you kind of have to be an ego-driven narcissist. And I think what's more interesting about Jordan is, and it's what's humbling to a certain extent, is how hard he worked. Is that, if anything, talent is not enough. If anything, being driven is not enough, but you have to be able to back that up with just an insane work ethic. And so certainly the person that really gains, I feel, from the documentary, apart from Jordan, who cements himself as this, iconic, amazing, world-class athlete, is Phil Jackson, who was able to take all these, like I said, ego-driven narcissists and treat them individually and give them responsibilities and have them take their own responsibilities and really just put them in a space where their talents could shine and where they could play for each other. And certainly Jordan is, again, a prime example of, you can have all the talent in the world, you can be the best basketball player of all time potentially, but if you only play for yourself, if you don't play for your coach, if you don't play for your teammates, then that's not how you win. The rumors are that Jordan greenlit it the day that LeBron James won his 3rd championship with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and it seems as though he was like, okay, it's time to remind people and to introduce myself to a new generation that I, Michael Jordan, am without a doubt the greatest basketball player of all time. Now, I personally think it's not that interesting to compare athletes from different eras. I think there's actually kind of no point to it. But I will say that it is an undisputed fact that Jordan is certainly the most influential basketball player of all time. I don't think there has been another athlete for any sport ever that did more for the growth of his sport, for the growth of his team as a brand, for the growth of the NBA than Michael Jordan. And if all these players now are on massive salaries, are, on these very lucrative shoe deals, it is because of Michael Jordan. If I told you that in France, basketball was not a thing before Michael Jordan, that would be an exaggeration, but there's truth to that. Like the fact that the NBA is in so many countries, that the Chicago Bulls is like a brand, and Jordan is even more than that. Jordan is a brand. I've probably seen Jordan play more basketball on Space Jam than I have him play actual basketball, or at least up until this documentary miniseries. And yet going into Space Jam in 96 or whenever it came out, I knew who Jordan was. And yet, like I said, I don't follow basketball. It's a sport that I'm interested in. It's a sport that I found fascinating. But, it's just I follow other sports and I just don't have the time really to take an interest. But the fact that, as a kid, I knew who Jordan was despite not watching basketball just shows what a superstar he was. And sort of one of the questions that I asked myself once the series was over is kind of why? What made it possible for him to be that ultimate superstar? And I've thought about it. I think it's a mixture of things. The first thing is obviously that he is an incredible athlete. Certainly, even if you're completely uncultured about basketball, you can certainly see that he's an exceptional player and an exceptional athlete. The second thing is he kind of arrived at this perfect moment. There was a new NBA commissioner who really did a lot to develop the NBA overseas and make it a much bigger product than it was. But also, it really is the advent of cable TV, of satellite TV, so all of a sudden it becomes easier and easier for people to have access to these images. It's really at a time also where sports media, sports journalism, sports broadcasting started becoming far more produced and became far more visually interesting to look at. And another factor, I think, is in the mid to late 80s, hip-hop started emerging, and African-American culture really went into the mainstream in a way that I don't think it ever had before. And finally, there's this imponderable force about Jordan, and that's that he's charismatic. He's just really cool. And that's something that's impossible to manufacture, that not a lot of people are blessed with. But it's the most marketable thing in the world. You look at the NBA and basketball before Jordan arrived, and Magic Johnson and Larry Bird were great players, but they weren't cool. Jordan made the NBA cool. He made basketball cool. He made Chicago cool. He made Nike cool. Because of Jordan, the Bulls from that era and Nike. And I think it's important to note as well how important the Dream Team of '92 were in exporting the NBA and basketball to the rest of the world. But because of all these factors, all of a sudden they left the realm of sports and athletics and entered the world of popular culture in a way that I don't think any other sports team, any other figure, apart from Muhammad Ali, has ever done and maybe will ever do. And so I guess if you take away anything from this documentary, it's that it's really important to be cool. So as always, thanks very much for watching the video. Please be sure to hit the like button if you like the review, subscribe if you're new, and until next time, see ya.